Hi, my name is Holly. I'm the creator of Dynamic Yi Jing Astrology. I practice astrology as the Oracle of Del Rey. Um, I created a new astrological system based off of the human design system, but with seven completely different types of charts that are different from their sacral and throat activations. Uh, this video is aimed for a broad audience. However, it helps to have a little bit of background in astrology or human design in order to kind of get the full context of what I'm explaining here, but I will do my best to reach all audiences. Um, this video is a math video, explains the math I kind of invented or just used or like have randomly applied. I'm not sure. Um, I've only gone as far as pre-calculus and math, so I haven't gotten that far. But I have a lot of fun with math, and I apply really simple math in really cool ways that work out with logical consistency. Uh, and this video is about that, the math behind dynamic Yi Jing astrology. Um, so we'll get started with sharing my screen. So it's a proprietary system. And it's seven unique equations or logical ways of understanding this chart. So, traditionally in human design, the chart is understood. These are considered nine chakras, the seven traditional chakras, and then the addition of the Ji chakra and the Splend chakra. Um, my system, their system bases it off of the sacral and the throat chakra. Mine bases it off of the solar plexus and the root chakra. So, this proprietary system. And it integrates the Yi Jing hexagrams and lines, and really takes a lot from interpretations from that text. So a chart is kind of faded back here. This is what a human design chart typically looks like. Um, how this works is that your astrological chart um, translates the planets, degrees, minutes, and seconds into a line of and a hexagram of the Yi Jing. Zen Human Design graciously hosts the Human Design Synthesis Index, which is which lists all the corresponding degrees to the lines of each hexagram. All the signs are listed. The whole zodiac wheel is listed there. Um, the Human Design chart looks at your natal birth chart, which is the one that everyone knows about themselves, and frequently it's when you were born. Um, and then it takes a different natal chart from when the sun was 88 degrees prior, or 80, roughly around 88 days before your birthday. So it takes two natal charts. So it's my birth chart. So this determines the right hand side of my chart. And then this is my design chart, which was taken August 24th of 87, 88, around 88 days before I was born. Um, and this chart informs this part of the human design chart or the design side. I have a lot of planets in 1 degree Virgo that show up here at 59.2 and 59.6. So it takes 13 placements from your natal chart as well as the chart from 88 days before you were born. And each planet activates a gate within the body graph. So the body graph is comprised of the nine chakras, and each planet activates a gate. And when two gates connect, it forms a channel. And when there's activations on either end of the channel, it activates or defines the corresponding chakras. So I have the 2551 channel, which activates my Ji and heart chakra, as well as I have the 4426 channel, which activates my heart and splenic chakra. So, um, otherwise, planets will just fall in what these are called hanging gates when they're not connected to a channel. Um, so when channels are white, that they're considered open or they're not defined. And then the ones that are colored in are considered defined. So this is where this roughly corresponds, or this actually precisely corresponds to which hexagram falls to which part of the zodiac. So that's where they are in the wheel, and that's how they correspond on the body map or the chakra map. That might be what I name it. Um, and so it's very tiny, as you can see, the hexagrams are made up of two types of lines, either yin, which are broken, or yonic lines, or yang, which are unbroken or phallic lines. And there are 6 lines total. And so if you consider just yin and yang lines in 6 positions, it creates 64 different variations. And that's what comprises the Yi Jing hexagrams. So this integrates tropical astrology with the Yi Jing Book of Changes, and it's really cool. Um, and as I was saying before, human design, they do activations based upon the throat and the sacral. Um, Mine are different. They're based off of the solar plexus and the root chakras. Uh, I've done the kind of math that I use to describe these charts uh, as a way of describing the original human design system, just applying my math and logic. So I'm going to jump to that really quick. Um, since these are the types that some people at least will be familiar with. So manifesting generator, generator, manifestor, projector, and reflector. Um, so these equations use 3-variable logic. So where these variables can either equal 1 or 0. So there's an F variable, a Y variable, and an X variable. And they can either equal 1 or 0. And then there are different combinations of 1 or 0 for each one, and each one is a unique combination. So it discreetly categorizes all 5 types. So X is 1 when the sacral chakra is defined. X is 0 when the sacral chakra is open. So all manifesting generators and generators will have the X equals 1. And then the other 3 types will have X equals 0. The F variable indicates when there are defined centers except for the sacral center. So manifestors and projectors will have defined centers except for the sacral. So they will always have an F of 1. And then by default, generators and manifesting generators will also have centers other than the sacral center defined because it can't define itself. It takes another center in order to define it. So it does have other centers besides the sacral defined by default. So their Fs will automatically equal 1. The only type that will not get an F of 1 is a reflector. So the F kind of screens for the reflector types. And projector. The Y variable, it indicates when there is at least one motor connected to the throat. What that means, here's the throat chakra. The motor centers are chakras that are considered highly energetic, which are the solar plexus, the root, the sacral, and the heart. So motor connected to the throat would be one of these 4 chakras having a channel connection to the throat, either directly or indirectly. So they can either directly connect like the solar plexus and throat through this channel right here, or they can indirectly connect. So if the heart was activated to the G and the G was connected to the throat, that would be a manifesting connection. So it's just one of those 4 centers somehow connected to the throat gives it a manifesting connection. So if the sacral center is active, if defined, it will be a manifesting generator. If the sacral center is open, it will be a manifester. And then projectors, which is my type, we don't have that kind of throat connection to a motor. And we also do not have the sacral center defined. We have an open sacral center. Um, but we do have centers defined. And then reflectors have all open centers. And so the Y value is like when it's a manifestor or a manifesting generator. So when there's one motor connected to the throat. So only manifestors and manifesting generators will have a Y, but only manifesting generators will have an X value of 1. So it works out logically that these 3 factors can define these 5 charts. And within answering either yes or no, or having a 1 or 0. So if you would look at someone's chart and determine, which variables they have. And in this equation, only manifesting generator variable types will pass the equation correctly. So manifesting generators have a 1 value for X, F, and Y. So 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3, divided by 3 is 1, which is what you wanted to do. Generators have a Y value of 0. So it's 1 plus 0 plus 1 is 2/3, which is not 1. So it fails the equation. And so only manifesting generators with these 3 values will pass this equation. And then the rest of them will fail the equation with their respective values. And so each equation is set up differently so that only one type passes and the rest will fail. So there's 5 separate equations where that will happen, where only one variable set will come out as true and the rest will come out as false. So I use this kind of logic to describe my new types. And I spent a long time trying to figure out how to format it and explain it. This is a very meticulous math project, but it's a labor of love. So I have 4 overall types. 3 of them have 2 subtypes each, and then one of them is a standalone type, the demi-rave. So my charts are based off of connections to the solar plexus and root chakras. In terms of an interpretation, I think that there's like energetic mutations happening in these centers and all of us, and they're going to be representing different types of activation. I don't really go into depth of that in this portfolio. This is more about the like basic underlying mechanics. So if you consider these centers and how they're defined by channels, these channels in red show the connections that the solar plexus and root have. The blue channels show where they're connected to each other, and then the red channels show where they're connected to the 4 other centers. And then these 3 chakras in yellow do not connect at all to the solar plexus or root. The G center connects to all 4 of these and only these 4. But it does not connect to solar plexus or root or these 2 as well. So the easiest type to discuss is the raven type. That's my type. I'm a raven. I feel like we're very bird-like. I'm trying to come up with like animal-inspired legendary creatures for each type. Rave to me is vampire. Raven to me is demon. And then werewolf for either the demi-rave or the mid-rave, maybe the demi-rave. And then I'm not sure for mid-rave. Like these 2, I'm one of them's werewolf. I'm trying to think of another type of legendary creature. but mathematically they're just, or like in terms of categorizing them, they're rave, pure rave, common rave, rare raven, common raven, demi rave, common mid rave, and pure mid rave. Ravens don't have the solar plexus or root defined at all. Um, a common raven will have one of these four defined, and a rare raven will not have one of these four defined. So ravens do not have the solar plexus or root defined, and then common ravens will have one of these four defined, and rare ravens will not have these four defined. So rare ravens can be either this type of projector, so a mental projector without a throat defined, or they can be reflectors. And then common ravens can be every type but reflectors. So a lot of different types of common ravens out there. So mid raves have the solar plexus and root defined, but only to each other. Um, so there are two types of mid-raves. The pure mid-rave just has the solar plexus and root defined to each other. And then the common mid-rave has the solar plexus and root defined just to each other, but there's other definitions in the chart. So they're defined only to each other and they don't connect to other centers. That's true for both of them. But then for the pure mid-rave, it doesn't have any centers defined whatsoever except for those two. So those are the mid-raves, where the solar plexus and root are defined in its own connection. That's the next kind of easiest category to discuss. Um, then there's the rave. Rave is my favorite type of chart. The first one I like kind of conceptualize. Um, my nephew, this is his chart, my beautiful nephew. He's a pure rave. It's my favorite type of chart. And I discovered the pure rave before he was born. So it delights me that that is his chart. Um, so rave connections are when the solar plexus or root defines one of these four centers, and that center is not defined by any other centers. So right here, the sacral chakra is defined by the root, but nothing else is defining the sacral center except for the root chakra. If the solar plexus was also defining it, it would still be a rave connection because the is by either or of these two they can be defined by. And then the throat here is also defined only by the solar plexus. So the difference between a pure rave and a common rave is that a common rave has this type of connection. This is my dad's chart here. So his splen right here is a rave kind of connection. It's activated only by the root chakra. But there's also other kinds of connections in the chart besides the rave kind of connection. So his sacral is connected to the throat and crown to the third eye. So pure raves only have these types of connections where a chakra is activated only by one or both of these. And then common raves have a connection like this, but they have other definitions in the chart. And then a demi-rave does not have a rave connection like this, where a center, one of these four centers is defined only by the solar plexus or root. So it does not have one of those connections. However, the solar plexus and or root are defined and they're defining other centers, but those centers are also being defined by other centers. So demi-raves, they comprise a lot of charts. Either or both of the solar plexus or root can be defined. And it defines centers, but those centers are also defined by other centers. So that's what makes it different than a common rave, because it defines the root and solar plexus define a chakra that isn't defined by any other chakras. So the root defines the sacral here, but it's also defined by the spleen and the G chakra. So that's a demi-rave kind of connection. So those are the 7 types. Logically, how to kind of logically identify them. So all human design charts will fall into one of these 7 categories, no matter what type they are. And those categories, then here they are side by side that will load. And here are celebrities and their types. Yeah. This is just an overview of how I think this goes beyond 1987 because this is the first instance of the human design wheel. And this is a document from the 1600s. So, this is a precise configuration of the I Ching that human design uses, and both the alignment here and the wheel. I talk about that. And so I don't think 87 is the first instance of this, but I speculate in that. So these are the equations that categorize the 7 charts, or can categorize all charts into the 7 types. So there's 5 types of variables that are used to determine the 7 charts. So X, Y, B, D, and Q. X and Y are the easiest to find because you just determine the chart's N variable, and N just looks for if the chart is open or if it's defined. So my G center is defined here, so my GN is 1. My heart center is defined, so my HN is 1, and my spleen is defined, so my PN is 1. And the rest are 0 because they are open. So it's the easiest variable to find. It speaks directly to the chart, open or closed. So the N solves for X and Y. So Y is just LN plus TN, which is whether your solar plexus or root are open or defined. So mine are both open, so my LN plus TN is 0. So Y is 0. And then the X value indicates whether or not the sacral, spleen, heart, or throat are defined. So these 4 that connect to these 2. And that's taken with RN, HN, SN, and PN. So I have HN is 1, PN is 1. So those are both 1. And then my throat is open, so that's a 0. And my sacral is open, so that's a 0. So my X is 2. So for my chart, my Y is 0 and my X is 2. That indicates that I have a Raven chart, or a common Raven chart. Unfortunately, with the rest of the 5 types, it goes beyond X and Y to figure out whether or not, or what type they are. So there are also B, D, and Q variables, which are kind of representing truths about a chart. Yes, no truths. The B variable looks for rave connections. So B is 1 when a center is defined by the root or solar plexus or solar plexus, and only defined by one of those 2 chakras. So that will create a B of 1, and then any other instance of definition or openness is 0. For a D variable, it's just looking for any centers that are defined but are not defined by the root or solar plexus. And then, so D is only one when a center is defined, but it's not defined by the root or solar plexus. And then the Q variable is only one when the center is defined by the root and or solar plexus and at least one other center. So that's for that. I should really have the Q be named D, but I was like, oh, I don't want to go through and redo this whole thing. Because the Q variable finds for the demi-rave or the demi-rave. So it's when if the sacral here was connected to the root and then also the G center, then the sacral would have a D of one. But that's D would be one here. So those are the three different types of variables, and they produce with the XY variable together, they all produce 7 different types of charts. Um, So by locating the X, Y, B, D, and Q variables for any chart, allows you to plug it into these equations and see whether the equation passes or fails. So every chart, if you find the variables and plug it into one of these equations, it will only pass one and it will fail the other 6 equations. This is President Trump's chart. He is a common rave. And so these variables, his B is 1, his D is 2, his Y is 1, and his Q is 1. These will only pass the common, I spelled that wrong, common rave chart proof, which is you want, um, these both can't be 0, but one can be 0, and then these cannot be 0. Well, why did it be 1 or 2? His Y is 1. You want his B to be 1 through 4. His B is 1. And then you don't want it to be 0. And his Q is 1 and his D is 2, so it will be a positive integer. So these variables will fail all the other proofs. For the common Raven chart proof, x minus y equals x. His x is 2, but his y is 1. So because his y is not 0, it will fail. And y is just whether the solar plexus and root are defined. But so these are the 7 proofs, and every chart will pass one and fail the rest. So this is just an example of proving a common Raven chart. This is my chart. Kind of went through this. This is Abraham Lincoln's chart. His proof is x minus y equals x, and x, if and only if x is 0. So with x minus y equals x, that can only be true if y is 0. So you want x and y to both be 0 for this. Whereas mine is x minus y equals x, but if and only if x is a number 1 through 4. So again, x minus y can't equal x unless y is 0 here. And you want x to end up being a number 1 through 4. So that's where x and y get used. In the rare Raven and common Raven chart proofs. And these are the possible variables that each chakra can have. So it can have a CN or CD variable. And then these 4 can have 4 possible variables, and then they just have 1. This is George Clooney's chart. He is a pure rave, like my nephew. And this is the proof you wanted. you want his variables to plug into here and for all of these to be true. So you want both the equation up top to be true as well as the rules at the bottom. So b plus y minus d minus q equals b plus y plus d plus q. So will only work out if d and q are 0 and if y is a number 1 between 1 and 2 and b is a number 1 through 4. So all pure waves will have a b value of 1 through 4 and a y value of 1 or 2, and they will have a d and q value of 0. All pure waves, so that will be true. And that is true of George Clooney's chart. That is true of my nephew's chart. So, if we plug in everything, his b variable is a defined heart only by solar plexus, so his b of 1, and then his y is 1. His q is 0, so he only has this one connection. So his y is 1, and his b is 1, and then he has a d of 0 and a q of 0. So that's what you need for this proof to work out. So 1 plus 1 minus 0 minus 0 goes 1 plus 1 plus 0 plus 0, 2 equals 2. So it holds that it's a pure wave chart. So my nephew is a different kind of pure wave. And I have his chart right here. So my nephew's y is 2 because he has both the solar plexus and the root defined, and his b is 2. Because root is defined only by the solar plexus, and the root is defined, or the sacral is defined only by the root. And so the throat as a RB of 2 of RB of 1, and the sacral is a SB of 1. And then is D, which D variables, center is defined but not defined by the root or solar plexus. Nope, the only is ones that are defined by the root and solar plexus. And so it doesn't have a Q variable either. So the other two are 0. And that's what we want. We want Q and D to be 0 because that's the only way this equation will make sense at the end. We want B and 1. We want Y to have a value of 1 through 2, value 2, and B to have a value of 1 through 4, B is 2. So Clooney's B value is 1, my nephew's is 2. His Y value is 2 and his is 1, but they're both pure waves by definition. Here's a demi-wave. So Y here, this will fail the pure wave chart. So Y is 1. And B is 0. B is the rave type connection chart. Or rave type connection. So the sacral is the only one connected to the root chakra, but the sacral is also connected to other chakras. So there's no B value to the sacral because it has those other connections. But because it's connected to both, it has a Q value. So Q here is 1. And D is 3. Because D looks for centers that are not defined by the root or solar plexus. I'm sorry, that means D is 2. So the G and the splenic are not defined by the root or solar plexus. So looking back to this proof, it fails because, well, you want B to be 1 through 4 and B is 0, so it fails that. And then D and Q are not 0. D is 1, or D is 2 and Q is 1. So you can't subtract it from one side of the equation and add it on the other side of the equation and have the equation equal the same on both sides. So this does not work. And then a common raven fails the equation because y equals 0 and y must equal 1 or 2. This is a common rave chart. This is President Trump's chart. So you want A to be a positive integer, which is greater than 1 or greater. Um, you want Y to be 1 or 2, and you want B to be 1 through 4. So you want a positive Y value and a positive B value. And then one of these has to have one value. So they both can't be 0. One of them has to not be 0. You have either a Q value or a D value. President Trump has all the values. So his sacral is defined only by the solar plexus, as his rave connection is B variable. His heart and third eye are defined only by the throat and not by the solar plexus, so that's the D variable. And then his throat is defined both by the solar plexus and these other two. So he has all 4 of the variables present in his chart through different connections. And if you plug them in, it ends up being that A is 3 and everything holds true. So looking at my precious nephew's pure rave chart is Y is 2, which is great. Is B is 2, which is what you need. Yep. That's where it does okay in the proof, but then is Q and D are 0. So they can't both be 0 because this causes A to be 0. So 2 times 2 is 4 times 0 is 0. We want A to be a number greater than 1. So that fails the common rave. Common raven, Y is 0. We want Y to be 1 or 2. So that fails for that. And then the demi-rave has no B value. We want B to be number 1 through 4. So none of these charts will pass the common rave one except for President Trump. So this is a friend of mine. I'll let his name. I'll be anonymous for redacted for privacy. He's a manifester in a common rave. And this is just looking at his chart and seeing how to look at it. So this blank can possibly have an all chakras can have an N value or not. And then this blank can have 3 additional values, a PB, PQ, or PD. So it will, if it has a PB, PQ, or PD, can only have one of these 3. And if it is, then it's also defined. So the N just looks for the definition, and then this looks for being defined under 3 different, how it's defined under 3 different circumstances. So, so his GN is 1 and his GD is 1. So his D is 2. His B is 1 because he has his throat defined here. And then his Q is 0. He doesn't have anything defined by both the solar plexus and something else. And his Y is 1 because it only has that defined. So this is one where you want Q one of what do you want all both these to be 0, but um you don't want any zeros in the entire equation, except you can have one here, but not in both. So this shows that his L1 is 1, his B variable is 1, 2 is 2, A is 2. So every part of the rule checks out. So it holds that he's a common wave chart. This is the demi-wave equation, and this is Vladimir Putin's chart. So you want Q to be 1 through 4. In this pure wave chart, Q is 0. Because Q represents when the center is defined by the root and solar plexus and at least one other center. So that's the demi-wave connection outright is the Q variable. So this is the only equation that calls for having a Q variable. And so the pure wave doesn't. The demi-wave will. And the common wave will not because the Y will be 0 and Y is be 1 through 2. So this demi-wave will pass as well. So let's look at Putin's chart first. So you want these two to have something and then B to be nothing. So he has nothing just defined by root or solar plexus. That's the B variable. So his B is 0. His Q variable, he has something defined by the root and then also by the throat. So that's a Q of 1. And it just looks for that B value, which it doesn't have. So 1 plus 1 minus 0 equals 1 plus 1 plus 0. So the equation works out as it should. So plugging it in with my nephews, he has a B value and no Q value. So he'd be 2 minus 1. I'm sorry, 2 minus 2 equals 4. So 0 equals 4. That would not work out. I think I did that right. Maybe not. Either way, it wouldn't work out. Let's look at this demi-wave here. So Q value is 1 for that sacral chakra. Is connected to the root and other centers. Y is 1. It's that root chakra, and then we need B, which is 0, because this is defined by other centers, and there's no just wave. It's 0. Q is 1, Y is 1. You want them to be integers like that. So, and B is 0. So it would be 1 plus 1 minus 0 equals 1 plus 1 plus 0. Similar to this, so. It is a demi-wave chart. And all other chart types will fail for one reason or another. Pyramid race is President Barack Obama's. They just have the solar plexus and root defined. And no other types of definition in the chart. So theirs is fairly easy to find. You want Y to always be 2, and you want all the variables to be empty. So, so long as that holds true, that can only describe this type of chart. So this type of chart can be defined by any of these channels, and it can have any type of hanging gate. kind of shows how like they could like how so many charts can be created with astrology. Um, but they can only be defined, they have to be defined to each other, and there has to be no other definition in the chart. But it can be any one of these channels, and then anything can be going on here, so long as no other centers are defined. Otherwise, it's not a pure mid-range chart. So this is the only chart where it's just one type of definition. Um, it's a projector type of definition, but it's just this is the only definition for that category. Yeah, because this is like a system based off of these two chakras. It's just that's how it fits. So they're kind of like the reflector of my system, basically. Um, and then this is a common midbrave where these two are connected only to each other, but then there's types of definition, any type of definition going on in the chart. So um, only charts that fit that criteria will pass this equation, such as Mr. Carlson here. Um, and I kind of already went over how these fail in various ways. So that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was an easy to follow math explainer and it was interesting or intriguing. Um, I invite you to reach out to me if you're interested in any investment or strategic partnership opportunities, as well as if you would like any astrological readings. I can be reached at the Oracle of Del Rey at gmail.com. I also invite you to please contribute a donation to my Cash App at #CoffeeCrow420. Uh, do a lot of unpaid work. It would be awesome to elevate my hustle. So thank you so much.